So in 2.1, we talked about demand, which is from the consumer point of view. 2.2 is supply, which is from the producer point of view. So in a way, it is the exact same, but it is the exact opposite. And so what we're dealing with is, right now we're in the product market. We're eventually going to get to two different markets. We've got the product market, and we've got later on what we'll call the resource or the labor market. But in this product market, you, the consumer, demands the product, the producer supplies the product, and then y'all meet somewhere in the middle and come to an agreement. So what is supply? Just like demand is twofold. So suppliers or producers or businesses, whatever you want to call it, have to be willing and able to sell the product. One, they have to be willing to sell the product, meaning that they actually want to be in that business. They want to provide that product or service. And able means they have access to the resources. Not every business has access to all the resources they want to produce the products that they wish they could. And so in order to produce something, you've got to have access to those resources. The law of supply. So this is a direct relationship. And so as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. As the price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. So that's the opposite. Whereas the law of demand is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. The law of supply is a direct relationship, meaning they do the same thing. The price goes up, the quantity supply goes up, the price goes down, quantity supply goes down. Reason being, producers are willing to supply a greater quantity when they can charge a higher price for it. So let's assume that you own some kind of landscaping or lawn care business. And so how many of y'all would mow a yard for $1? Yeah, you would. It's not worth your time. How many of y'all would mow a yard for $5? Probably still not. What about $20?
Depends on the size.
Yeah, depends on the size of the yard. Maybe it's grandma, something like that. But you're probably not going to go out of your way or, skip school or take time off work to go do it. What about $50 a yard? Yeah, probably.
No.
Still no?
No.
And we're talking like a typical half acre normal subdivision yard.
Yeah, I would.
We're talking maybe 2 hours worth of work.
No.
At the most. Hour to 2 hours.
$25 an hour. That's $25 an hour.
Well, it could, but don't overthink this. We're just saying in general. This is the amount of money you get. All right. What about $100 per yard?
Yeah.
Would you mow a yard? Maybe multiple yards?
How could you mow that yard?
What about $1,000 a yard?
I'd be like,
Yeah. At that point, are you realigning your resources, your time to mow more yards? Yeah. All right. So this is law of supply. You are the supplier for producing that good or service. What?
I was just looking for the slide. Right there.
Well, this slide is not here.
This slide is probably not in the
looking for the
notes.
slide.
Anyways, so what we see is as the price of the product or the service increases, the supplier or the producer is willing to produce a greater quantity because you can charge that higher price. This is the law of supply. Now, you're not necessarily going to get that price. Very few people are going to pay you $1,000 to mow a half acre, but the theory, the concept is that as that price goes up, you are willing and able to supply that product at those higher prices. So, this is your supply curve. Supply curve slope up and to the right, which is different from demand, which sloped down. So, demand sloped down, down, demand, that's your alliteration. Supply to the sky, that's your alliteration. But they slope up and to the right because of that law of supply. That as the prices go up, the quantities are also going to increase, and so supply curves are always going up. You can see the supply schedule on the left. You've got the prices and the quantity supplied at those prices. So just like we had the demand schedule, we also have the supply schedule. So, as always, there's some kind of fun-filled hypothetical they're going to throw at you. What if there are new and more productive milking machines? And so just like with 2.1, our product is milk, is what we're producing. And so if we are this milk producer, what if there are new and more productive milking machines? Do you think supply is going to increase or decrease? Increase, yeah. We're going to be more efficient, so we're going to produce more. So we're going to see the quantity supplied at every price increase. supply curve is going to shift to the right. Remember, curves increase to the right, they decrease to the left. If we had a more horizontal supply curve, later on in this unit we're going to talk about a concept called elasticity, which ultimately determines the slope of these curves. If we had a more horizontal supply curve and it moved to the right, it looks like it moves down. If it were to decrease, which would move to the left, which we'll see in a second, it looks like it goes up. So this is a good example of why you can't say curves go up, down, in, out. If you'll always say curves go to the right, curves go to the left, you'll always get the shift correct. It'll help you to remember which way to shift that curve based on increase or decrease. But this would be a supply curve increase, shift to the right. No, prices didn't change, it's just the quantity supplied at those prices is increased. So, what if the price of dairy cows increases drastically? So it's going to increase or decrease supply? Decrease, because cows are a resource in the production of milk. If a resource gets more expensive, supply is going to decrease because you can't produce as much for the same amount of money. So, we would see the quantity supplied at every price decrease, therefore supply curve shifts to the left. Prices didn't change, only the quantity supplied changes. So, we had five shifters of demand. You have 5 shifters of supply. And remember, these are not going to outright be, this is not something that College Board has said, hey, you need to know these 5 shifters. But by knowing these, it's going to help you a lot, especially when we put supply and demand together and they give you some crazy hypothetical situation. Well, you've got to determine, is this going to affect supply, or is this going to affect demand, or is this going to affect both, and how are those curves going to change? So knowing these and knowing how to apply these becomes really beneficial down the line. But the prices and availability of inputs or resources. So if the price of a resource goes up or the availability of a resource decreases, the supply is going to decrease. So if whatever we use, let's say we make t-shirts. Well, if the cost of fabric or thread or whatever increases, we're not going to be able to produce as many shirts because we can't just magically have a bigger budget. So we're limited to the amount of money we have. And so we're going to be able to produce less shirts because our resources are more expensive now. Or if you lose resources, if you produce lumber and one of your forests burns down, well, that's a decrease in the quantity of resources or the availability of resources. So you're not going to be able to produce as much. That supply is going to shift to the left. If prices of resources go down or the availability increases, then supply is going to increase. So if resources get cheaper, you're going to produce more. Supply curve is going to shift to the right. Number of sellers is very direct. If you have more people selling it, supply increases. If you have less people selling it, supply decreases. What we're going to see later on is producers are going to enter and exit into these markets based on what they think they can earn profits. And so when that happens, it changes the number of producers and it's going to affect the supply of firms later on. But that's all it is. Number of sellers, supply shifts to the right, or if number of sellers increases, supply shifts to the right. Number of sellers decreases, shifts to the left. 3, technology. Technology only increases supply, ever. So anytime it ever mentions technology, a new technology, or they bought a new technology, or anything about technology, it's only going to shift the supply curve to the right. Reason being, no business is ever going to invest in technology that makes them less efficient. It does not make sense. If you own a business, you're never going to spend money on any kind of new technology that makes you produce less. It just doesn't make sense. And so when businesses invest in technology, it's only to increase production or make themselves more efficient. And so because of that, supply or technology only shifts the curve to the right. 4, government action. You got 2 types, taxes and subsidies. So taxes are when the government collects money from businesses. Well, that's a new expense. And so now if the businesses have to pay the government, that decreases the amount of money they have towards production. So taxes shift the curve to the left. Taxes decrease supply. Subsidies are when the government gives money to businesses to produce more. The government has subsidized COVID vaccine production so that they can increase a greater amount. And so the government is giving money to increase production. So subsidies shift the supply curve to the right. Taxes shifted to the left, subsidies shifted to the right. And then 5, expectations of future profit. If businesses think that they can earn a greater profit in the future, well, they're going to enter into that market. And so supply is going to increase. If firms think that they're not going to be able to sell as much in the future, they're going to leave that market and supply is going to decrease. And so a lot of that is timing. I mean, the businesses that get that right in the real world make a lot of money. Y'all remember fidget spinners? Okay. Got really popular really quick. You saw a ton of producers rush into that market because there was a lot of interest. People were willing to spend their money. The businesses that made the most profit are the ones that got out at the right time and started doing something else and aren't sitting on warehouses full of these fidget spinners right now that aren't selling. You know, those were the smart companies. They got in, they made their profit, they got out at the right time. They knew what to do. That was the expectations. They saw it and said, hey, this is eventually going to die out. This is a trend. I'm going to leave this market and go do something else with my resources. Note, price doesn't shift the curve. So just like it did with demand, it doesn't shift the supply curve either. So when there's a change in price, it only affects the quantity supply. So if you are mowing yards, like we talked about, a change in price only affects the quantity that you're willing to supply. It doesn't affect the actual amount that you are able to supply. So a change in price just moves you along the curve. If it's one of these 5 shifters, it moves the entire curve. So just like there was a difference between demand and quantity demanded, there is a difference between supply and quantity supplied. All right. So we have a couple examples, and this will be the last thing we do. So once again, product is hamburgers. Strange virus kills 20% of cows. What is the shifter, and is supply going to increase or decrease? So what's the shifter?
Oh, no, sorry.
There you go. Availability of resources. And then which way is it going to shift? Left. Good. Because if our cows die, we can't produce as many hamburgers. Supply is going to shift to the left. All right. Price of hamburgers increased 30%.
Doesn't change.
Very good. Price does not shift the curve. It's just going to move you along the curve. 3, government taxes burger producers. Good. Taxes. It's going to shift the supply curve to the left. 4, new bun baking technology cuts production time in half.
Technology to the right.
Very good. Technology and to the right. 5, government subsidizes beef producers.
Government subsides and then to the right.
Very good. So government action, it's a subsidy. It's going to shift the supply curve to the right. And this is a good one. Minimum wage increases to $20.
It would go to the right, but would it be?
No, it would decrease.
They gotta pay people
Yeah,
more.
that's a resource they're giving up, to pay people more.
You're close. So it's going to shift to the left. It's going to decrease supply. We talked a little bit in Unit 1, and it comes back and it becomes very important as we go throughout the course. But labor is a resource in production. You always have to remember that. Labor is a resource in production. Minimum wage is a labor cost. Now, we don't actually get to minimum wage until we get to the end of the course and graph it and talk about it. But minimum wage is a labor cost or a resource cost. And so if labor becomes more expensive, then a resource is becoming more expensive. And it's going to shift the supply curve to the left. Because now you either have to pay your current employees more, or you have to essentially fire employees because you can't afford to pay everyone the new price. And so you're either going to use revenue to pay people instead of produce now, or you're going to have fewer employees, which is also going to cause you to produce less. So either scenario, that supply curve is going to shift to the left with a minimum wage increase.